Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. This week's guest is Michael Anderle. He's a top 30 best-selling Amazon author and the CEO of LMBPN Publishing, and he'll explain what that is momentarily. He's used what he learned from his first 2 decades reading science fiction and fantasy to segue into urban fantasy and military fiction in the next decade. And with that, I specifically mean his Arthurian Gambit, which series we will discuss in this interview, along with how he has grown as an author and helped so many other authors along the way. Welcome, Michael.
Welcome, John. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. So for the audience here, LMBPN stands for?
It actually stands for London, Madrid, Barcelona, Paris, and New York. And what originally was Milan, not Madrid, because my wife was looking into learning some stuff, and I had built it for the top 5 fashion capitals of the world. And then when we built this company back in late 2015, we just co-opted the use of that, and it's actually, we learned that Milan and Madrid is another publishing, so they actually are top 5 publishing capitals kind of the world.
Good, and they're both M words, so that works.
That worked out excellent. How appreciative, Italy, we thank you.
Yes. So what I always do when I do a podcast with an author, I always like to read 1, 2, or in your case, 3 of your books, because I just got absolutely addicted to that Arthurian Gambit. That was just so much fun.
Oh, thank you.
So Bethany Ann, who's your main protagonist, is an amazing creation and seriously kick-ass. So how'd you come up with her? She's like great.
So the back in that time frame, I was reading a lot, and so I was reading a lot of indie authors, and at that time I'm like, you know what, I could probably do this, and I wanted something that I realized that I'm what I term a whale reader, and it's based on a gambling term, whale gambler, and that is what I kind of defined it as is a person who reads at least 1 book a week, and so in doing that, I was also into advertising and different things of that nature online, and I realized that I needed a series. And if I was going to write a series, then I realized, well, I need to be able to write something that I'm not going to get bored of. Mm-hmm. And so I had created or concocted a concept that would allow me to do things both on Earth, in near Earth orbit, and then far reaches. And they ended up being 7 books each of those series. But going back specifically to Bethany Ann, I felt more about doing a female protagonist versus a male, because I didn't want to write this testosterone-laden, grunting guy. And so I built it female for that purpose right there. But then again, I also was attracted to strong women. Now, this is back in late 2015. So while strong women were obviously a thing, they weren't nearly as over the top as it is now in society. Mm-hmm. And so with Bethany Ann, a couple of things that are relevant. One of them is she has a penchant for shoes, right?
She sure does.
And that comes from my wife. And if you've read the 3, you might have read in the back in the author notes, I put this thing, it's like anything I've learned about shoes, women's shoes, comes from my wife. And at that time, she would have me get up in the morning because I worked from home, and she'd be like, "What do you think of this pair of shoes? What do you think about that pair of shoes?" I have no idea why she thought it was relevant to ask me my opinion, because I'm like, I don't work that way.
Right.
And she can, and so there was that situation. And so, I just felt that Bethany Ann would be a more caring individual. And I thought she should have 2 defining characteristics and 1 fun one. And that trilogy, or the trinity of properties comes from actually Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs talked about it back when he introduced the iPhone. And if you go back and watch that, you're going to say, it's a web browser, it's a phone, it's an iPad, it's a web browser. And so when I delved more into that, he believed that oftentimes you could only capture 3 essences of a project or a product. And I felt that was really kind of relevant to what I was doing at the time, because I was seeking everything to try to figure out, how do you build a compelling character? Mm-hmm. I don't read a book. The action's nice, but I read it for the characters. And so that was it. It's like, she is about family, whether it's real family or extended, created family.
Right.
She's about justice, and she's about Coca-Cola, because I'm a big Coke fan versus Pepsi. And so that is really kind of the genesis of what's going on there. And then I happen to like paranormal vampires. I happen to like sci-fi. And so I was trying to find a way to concoct, to bring all of these and meld all of these different genres that I had interest in, and the off chance that it became popular. I was going to have to keep writing this.
So that was one thing that was really interesting too, is the genesis of the vampire. It was a brand new take on it, because I kind of like, okay, here's a vampire story. But then, it's like, okay, vampires.
Those that are listening, you don't get to see John's face when he's rolling his eyes like left and right. Oh, great.
Yeah, like I said, because I read a lot, so I guess based upon your definition, I definitely qualify as a whale prime,
I think if you go whale, you go like Kraken.
I guess I'm Kraken, yeah. But but then after I got in and found out what happened, once you get into it, find out what happens, how she becomes that way, and then the delineation between the vampire trope that I'm so overrun on and this new one, then became like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then you have a sense of justice, which makes sense. And she's such a likable character, even though she is. I love also her sense of propriety with her language. And at the start of each book, having to have that disclaimer,
Yes. So what John is obliquely referencing at the moment is that Bethany Ann curses a lot. And the challenge, it has been challenging. For those new authors out there, if you care to get a little salty with your language, expect a lot of pushback. Expect your sales, honestly, not to be as high as it could be if you would keep it a lot cleaner. I, however, did not, because I find cursing often funny. I just find it funny. And so for me to do that, and so I started this premise saying, she's not going to allow the same curse word over and over again. That's just lazy. And I was honestly, what I was doing was creating justification for her allowing me to say all these stupid things. And a lot of people at the time, I remember the fans were asking me, how does he come up with all of these different curse words? And I'd never told them for the longest time. And finally, I admitted that there was like this Curse-O-Matic online where you could just click a button and it would come up with these stupid curse words. And then it got so bad that I would take this one from that choice and that one because, it was rerunning their own self and it was duplicating stuff. And so, yeah, I appreciate that oblique reference, but it was a consternation among some of the people. One person ended up saying on something I was reading, and it wasn't specifically about my book, but it's just in general, if I see one F-bomb, I'm out of here. So that was like, all right. I just put that as the very first word of the next book, and it was like top 30 in the store. I'm like, now mind you, that wasn't book one, so it had some way to go. But I had a real attitude. Let's just say that. Now I've cursed so much in the last 5 years. Now I'm actually bored with just cursing it all.
Yeah, I mean, not to justify cursing, because with our Rise to the Future series, we're pretty rigid on the use of profanity, lack thereof. But what you've done with it, though, because it's not the standard old F-bombs, and so it's like you're having fun with it. So it's not this. It doesn't come across like someone whose language pops out at 100 words.
Yeah, it's similar to whenever stand-up comedians used to curse just to get
a rise.
Right, to get a rise, to get a reaction. It's not intended that way. Now, mind you, if you do it, you're going to get people saying that's why you're doing it. But in today's society, I'm like 8-year-olds say it, so I don't why. Yeah,
because they've read your books too much.
I have had people actually go like, you've been cursing more often, sweetheart, and they're like,
Yeah. So, but that's, I think, possibly some of the least of our societal problems. But anyway, that's not the subject of this interview, so we shall move on. So, one thing on when I went over and looked at your website for LMBPN, other than one feral chipmunk on the cover art, they were all the personas were female, at least in what I saw there. Is there some particular? I mean, obviously, I've no problem either way on that, but it really struck me as a definite factor.
Well,
and I didn't see any F in the LMBPN, so I didn't see.
So there's there's 2 or 3 things that one of them is absolutely you're seeing a snippet in time.
Right.
Another one is because more than likely, if you went to the home page, what you see at the top is kind of like what books are coming out this week. LMBPN is a prolific publisher. Unlike, a lot of publishers, those that you even hear that are big names that have been, 50 or 30 to 40, 50 years, they do at most in any of their sci-fi urban fantasy imprints 60 books a year, 80 books maybe a year. LMBPN does 250 to 300 books a year. So we do anywhere, depending on if we're doing re-releases, box sets, new, front list books, publishing some, additional books, any of those things, we often have anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 titles a week coming out. Wow. Now, it also just so happens that 2 or 3 of our most prolific authors are also female. So their characters almost invariably are female.
Sure.
My own characters tend to be lean 60-40 now. I have done some male characters. Brownstone is one of the real popular characters that I've done. Couple characters, but also what you're going to find a fair amount of times in male-driven like sci-fi, you'll see ships. You won't actually see the male character on the cover. Now, from a publishing perspective, and for those that know authors, if you want to find out which character is going to sell better, females are going to, generally speaking, sell better. You have a higher propensity of female readers, and that includes in what you would think would be strictly male genres, except for lit RPG. And so you have this ability to sell easier with female characters. I didn't know that in the beginning. That wasn't my original intention. But I do know that a lot, when I explain that to some of my collaborators, whom are already female, it tends to, there you go.
I get it. Wow. That was interesting. But it just really, it's not common to see that. So that was going to be one question. I was really fascinated to find out what it was that you did that. So now you came up with, however many years ago, which we'll talk about, the 20 books to 50K. So what sparked that? Because I'm very interested in that, because with Writers of the Future, the whole purpose there is to help aspiring writers to get that initial break, and artists. So it seems like 20 books to 50K is also a similar type of a mindset to be able to help writers on the business side of things. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I released my first, second, and third book in November of 2015. Now, the first book, it took me probably 6 to 8 weeks to write. So the second one was like 9 days, and the next one after that was like 11 days. What happened was NaNoWriMo happened in November. So I had my 4th book in December, my 5th book in January, and I was making more than $10,000 a month in January. And so at that time, if you were in the author area, the indie author specifically arena, there was a lot of, woe is me type of attitude. And I was on a website at the time called K-Boards. And with what's going on, I was seeking to find out other people, and I was getting a lot of pushback. People going, "Oh, this can't be true. This is whatever." And I was also teaching, if you will, my fans what it meant to be an indie author. I was talking about it in my author notes. And so at that time, 4 to 5, technically 5 of my fans were really interested. And I said, you know what? I had just gone down to Cabo a couple of months before, and in my mind, 20 books to 50K was how many books I would have to write to make $50,000 a year consistently. And I was, I had just put out at the time my second book, and I was making $7.50 on average a day. If you 20 times 7.5 gets you 54,000, so that's kind of where the 20 books to 50K from. So when I was helping my fans, I'm like, you know what? We need to take this conversation out of the Facebook page related to the books, the stories. Let me go create another Facebook page, and we'll all talk there. And so because of that, I named it, branded it 20 books to 50K based on my own desire, right? When I went to a particular indie author event in February of 2016, so I'm 3.5 months into this, there was a lot of talk there. And those fans, a lot of them had started releasing their own books, because we all hit the ground running. Many of them would do it, and at the time it was 4 of them. And all of them had introduced themselves into the top 10,000 of the store, which was kind of unheard of at the time. And so by then I was, I'm writing every single day. I'm usually working 20 to 22 hours a day on all of this, and I could say I had perhaps a slightly short temper. And I just kind of laid down the gauntlet. I was tired of the flack I was getting, and I just wanted to talk business. I wasn't going to talk how to write. That wasn't relevant to me. so I threw down the gauntlet and I said, here, boom, 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 here are the results of what I'm doing. If you care to talk about this anymore, join me on 20 Books to 50K. We'll help you over there. And I had 4 people. I figured I'd get 4 more, and I personally could help 8 people. I wasn't ready. It was the weekend of this event that was in Austin at the time, and I wasn't expecting to get 80 in the first weekend. And so all of a sudden, I'm overwhelmed. And I reached out to quite a few people who were at that event, and Shawnee, John, and Dave, it was their event, and I wish I could remember what they called it, but it's escaping me at the moment. And we had everyone from Mark Lefebvre of Kobo was there at that time, and quite a few other Drafted Digital. And so they jumped in to help foster this community that I had built. And so a lot of my fans and my collaborators and things who would become collaborators jumped in to help me as well. And we started this. And then now it has since grown since 2016 to like 54,000, 55,000 people.
So how many people attend when you have your annual conference in Las Vegas?
COVID being what it is, we probably had about 12 to 1,500. It was expected pre-COVID to be around 2,000 to 2,500. And so we kind of take over the event. It's a nonprofit event. It's the cost of doing the tickets is about as low as we can go and still cover everything. It's like I myself nor LMBPN receive any income whatsoever from this. We spend a fair amount of income each month, each year, but that is headed up by Craig Martell.
Got it. So now I think some of my staff met you originally last year 2 years ago. Oh, sorry, we didn't do anything last year. Okay, so 2 years ago at WordFire.
Yes, with Kevin J. It was at the Superstars event.
Superstars, right.
With Kevin J. Anderson.
And they came back talking about you. Wow, this is a great guy. You got to read his stuff here. And I was like, oh gosh, more stuff to read, And so finally, then when we finally scheduled, okay, good, I'm going to read his stuff. And then it just became like, oh my gosh, I had so much fun. There's enough stuff that's the heavy super drama stuff that goes on in just regular life. I don't need that. I don't need to escape to that to be able to get some other take on super duper heavy drama. So it's just a lot of fun.
Really.
And
that's, really, honestly, that is my intent. While there is an underlying message occasionally,
there absolutely is
pushing. The reality is, I don't read to get more drama. I've got plenty of that
for sure. Yeah.
So
but just I really like your underlying thing, which it's not like ostentatious, but it's just that sense of fairness and what's right and wrong. It's not country versus country. It's just, is this right or is this wrong? And Michael, who hasn't re-entered into the story yet, but in the first 3, things are jockeying that it's something's obviously going to be happening as it grows more and more, and then you get a little intuition about, okay, something has obviously got to happen now with the friend who's living in her head with her.
Yeah. There's a couple of things to mention to authors, and some of these you might have mentioned on the show. I apologize if I'm just reiterating this. One, don't name a character that's after yourself. I didn't actually name Michael, the character you're talking about, after me. It was after Michael the Archangel, because you'll see he's called Archangel in the series.
Yeah.
His title. That's what it was about. It wasn't until like 2 or 3 years when a fan said, that's a pretty significant size cojones for you to name a character after yourself. And I'm like, uh-oh, I actually never intended that. And the second one is always, start your character names with a letter and then never use the same letter again for any primary character whatsoever. Just Adam, Bob, Charles, David, whatever it takes, in order to keep yourself on track, because I ended up duplicating. I got so confused in the beginning with character names. And with a series this long and this far-reaching, it became difficult for me to remember who was who, especially if their names were even remotely similar.
Yeah.
So, for what it's worth.
Okay, that's a good tip there. And then the 2 name with Bethany Ann, I thought that was very adventurous too. She's not just a name; she's Bethany Ann. But then she has no last name, so that works out. So she has 2 names.
Well, the thing is, my stepmother's name is Jolynn. And it's always confusing because I always assumed it was first name. No, so it's her first name, middle name. But then other times it's people's only name, their first name. It's 2 words. The other part of it is I couldn't stand having one more River, Colt, massive gun sound. I was like, no, I just want a generic name and let what they do become who they are.
Yeah, which was great. She was like, Beth, in the end, the last thing you think of that she would be like some amazingly effective beauty as well as lethal weapon, you know, in the name of justice, you know.
Yes.
So that was pretty clever on that.
Well, thank you.
So, how familiar are you with Writers of the Future?
I'm familiar with it some. Obviously, I'm familiar with what was going on in the background, but a lot of the people that I've met since I was in the industry. Now, I'm not from this industry whatsoever. I had no background. I didn't know any other writers. I've since met and/or befriended like Kevin J. Anderson and Mark Lefebvre and others that really speak highly of the organization and how it supports science fiction.
Yeah, it was actually created in '83 by L. Ron Hubbard, and he had a long history in the 30s and 40s as a pulp writer, and he had helped a lot of aspiring writers back then. You know, a lot of the earlier Golden Age authors he had actually helped out with, and he was also he was the president of the Fiction Guild in New York, and he was also he'd written a lot of articles for writing magazines, Writer's Digest and whatnot back then. And those are essays that are still used today in the writing workshop. Yeah, that's the whole thing of it, is to be able to provide that leg up for the aspiring writer. It started off, and we had, like yourself, it started humble beginnings with Aldous Budrus. I don't know if ever heard of that name, but he was a very famous editor at the time. So he became the first coordinating judge, and he brought in his other friends and other famous writers at the time. So you've got, Anne McCaffrey. Todd is now is one of the judges.
I met both of them.
Yeah, so they were both judges, and we've got Kevin Anderson co-writes the Dune books with Brian Herbert, but his father, Frank Herbert, was one of the first judges. So we have that type of a history with the writing contest, and similarly with the illustrating contest with major names in illustration back then. And it just continues on because it's blind judging that everybody has a fair shot at winning the contest. The judges only see the story or the art. They have no idea if it's male, female, nationality, or anything.
Can we talk about that just for a minute? Because maybe it's politically incorrect for me to say, but unfortunately, there are both two things that I do not believe Writers of the Future, as you say, the blind part of this. But there are a lot of politics in a lot of organizations out there, and I've seen and watched and got embroiled in some of them myself. And so I have a lot of respect for double blind judging, or blind judging as you're doing, and a lot of respect for the level of experience that professionals bring to what's going on. Because I'm going across multiple genres here. We know about the implosion of the romance writers situation. We understand, and there are a couple of others that I won't name, but some of their most storied individuals actually don't sell at all. It was politically motivated, and I mean inwardly, not Republican, right. Democrat. I mean inwardly, sure. Politically motivated. And yet, you and I have discussed previously about the quality of where some of the winners of Writers of the Future and where they've gone. And as a publisher now, kind of matured into that role, I understand what it means to have people be willing to say, hey, whoever wins, give them my card. If it wins with you guys, give them my card. Mm-hmm. And so, that's quite a lot of accolade right there.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Rise of the Future is a market. We are going to have stories that will be appropriate for middle school on up, and we're very transparent about that. So, whereas I love Bethany Ann dearly, she would not see. I love her dearly. She would not find a home in Writers of the Future.
We're going to have to put the evil brother to Writers of the Future. Writers of the Purient Future. I don't know.
So, and it's interesting how it works also with Rise of the Future too, because people win strictly based upon the merit of their work.
Yes.
And same goes with the illustration as well. And so some people are really lovely people when you get to meet them, and some people are less than lovely people, but they're chosen and they're flown out to Hollywood based upon the fact they won the contest, and for the most part, it works out really, really well. And you've got people have gone on to be very, very successful. We've had, some instances where their personality was less than, appropriate, like, nobody raised them with the basic manners of saying thank you when someone does something nice for you. But that's fine. That's not why they won. They didn't win because of manners. So if anything, that's actually helped even more the whole process of Writers of the Future, because there are no favorites. It's just, personality-wise, it's just straight, is it a good story? Is it good art? And we have found that the people that are appreciative tend to do better in life, because if a publisher or editor or anybody in a professional capacity has to work with you, if you have a choice between working with someone who's fun to work with and someone who isn't, the quality of work can be really great, but just that one extra factor makes a difference on somebody moving on their career. At least that's what I found.
No. Well, one of the things, I don't remember what we spoke about, but Robin Cutler, who helped build Ingram Spark for Ingram, which is a massive company. If you don't know who they are, they're basically the company that got Amazon started in the book publishing and still supports them to this day. And so they went to a POD and they tapped Robin Cutler from Amazon, hired her away. Well, she retired, right? Quote, quote, retired. Well, on the second day of her retirement, I ended up talking her into hiring her over to bring into LMBPN Publishing. And she and I have had this conversation. I'm 50 some years old. and Robin is has retired. I'm not claiming I know what her age is. I'm just merely saying she said she's retiring. And so both of us have talked about it. And while we are considered a small trade type organization just from our sales, even though it's multiple seven figures, you have to pretty much be 50 or 100 million before you become medium press in this world. And so both of us are like, our life's too short to deal with jerks. We don't care. I don't care how good your book is. We will let you go if you're a jerk. So if you're a jerk, don't even apply, because you're going to waste both of our time.
That's a definite, that bears out what I was saying there. It's so true. There's a lot of great talent out there. And a lot of great talent has a great personality. So if you have a choice.
Yeah, let's once again, you touch on all of these fun things to chit-chat about. There's a lot of great talent out there. Just because there's a lot of great talent, don't think you can't be one of them. And at the same time, recognize there's a lot of great talent out there. And it's worldwide now. I mean, we pull writers from around the world. Our artists, I have an artist that we've used for multiple years who lives in Transylvania. Transylvania. I mean, I don't know how cool is that? It is. Exactly.
We got winners this year from 9 countries in Illustrators of the Future. 9 countries we got winners from this year.
What are they? America. Okay, we have 8 more.
Yes, we do have winners from the United States, but UK, Australia, South Africa, Portugal, Spain. I mean, there's just I don't remember this. I just remember the line at the bottom said 8 or 9. So I went, okay, good. 8 others plus.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And if you're in the genre science fiction, there are more science fiction readers in China than all of the United States.
Oh, it's crazy. And just this podcast, when this goes out, Russia. There's so many listeners in Russia as well as China. It's like throughout Asia and Europe.
Oh, let's shout out to Russia. Lit RPG. Where was it started? Russia.
Yeah. So it's. I was surprised the first time I had the breakdown of who all listens to the podcast, because as I said, it's about 1 million listeners that we have on each episode, and then getting the breakdown, because it's about 110 countries now that listen, and it's just crazy how universal science fiction and fantasy are, but also English, So I realize that you're into publishing all the different languages too, so I assume that means translations, not just publishing.
Correct. Yeah, we have integrated translation. We don't outsource our translation to other companies.
Yeah, so that's really good on that. So anyway, the thing with Writers of the Future is providing that helping hand, and it's grown the word of mouth. We did that online writing workshop that's free. We've got over 6,000 people that have taken or are taking that one. We have the forum, which usually the last several years is won Best Forum Award on a popular readers poll. And then we've got the blog. And so it's just, in the book itself, routinely wins, each year's anthology routinely wins 2 or 3 book awards, plus, the sales of it, which is always great for the winners to be able to put that in there. And it's interesting now, too, that because it is now acknowledged as there's no back scene or backdoor entry into the contest. But every other week, I see someone with a press release saying I was an honorable mention in Writers of the Future. This week's cover article, Karen Joy Fowler on Publishers Weekly, she's got the cover of the magazine, and it says in there she got her start. She won L. Ron Hubbard Writers of the Future back in Volume 1. So it's pretty cool how it's just, because we haven't changed, we kept true to the original prime purpose that L. Ron Hubbard created it with, and it's done us well. Even when it went through some of the various changes that have occurred in science fiction and fantasy the last decade or so, the various political aspects of it, and we just didn't get into that stuff at all. We don't take sides. We're just straight. Our purpose is to support the aspiring writer and artist, and we just stay with that. And it's
yeah, you have a beacon. You have one particular goal in mind. That's the light that you go towards.
Yeah. And so it's when that particular evolution was happening in science fiction and fantasy, tried to pull us into it, I stayed clear. I said, I'm not going to play that game. Didn't get into it. And so the backlash on them was way worse than anything on us, saying that Rise of the Future has done more for science fiction and fantasy than you could ever hope to. So back off, guys. Anyway,
Yeah.
So on when we spoke on our little pre-interview, you talked about writing beats. And so if you can talk about what writing beats is and what's its value, and then beats versus pantser.
So most people understand that you write what pantsing is. And if you don't, then it's writing by the seat of your pants. I mean, that's exactly it. You start, you go, John was walking down the hallway and he heard, you're just writing.
Yeah.
Then you have the opposite of that, is like a high, heavy-duty outline. You know exactly what's going to go on in every little twist and turn. Somewhere in between those two are beats. So it's the name is kind of taken from the beating of your heart, ka-dunk, ka-dunk. And every major ka-dunk is something that happened. Like, it's just the genesis, a sentence or two about what is that scene. Bethany Ann has to go to the bank and withdraw some money, and something happens. And then that's a whole chapter. What something happened in this particular instance is somebody tried to rob a bank while she was inside trying to get money, and it pissed her off, and she took care of stuff. A lot of stuff actually happens that way. Something happens, and it pisses off Bethany Ann, and she takes care of stuff. But within all of that, what those beats are is unique to every person. I like to say, if you have 10 authors, there's 11 ways to write this story. Each author is going to have a unique way, and there will be another one. There's probably the right one that none of us got.
Right.
And so, I'm very objectively subjective about what is correct. And the answer is, it's always, as people I'm sure have said, it's whatever works for you. People would like to know, what's the bullet? I was like, I can tell you exactly what the special bullet is to write, so long as you write exactly like me. If you don't write exactly like me, my advice is going to have varying degrees of support.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. It just means that your brain doesn't operate the same way mine does, which is fantastic. Otherwise, we wouldn't have unique stories that we do.
Right.
So those, for me, beats would be, if you take a spreadsheet, on the left-hand side, you would write what I would consider mini arcs. Bethany Ann has to go and get the money out of this bank in another country. Bethany Ann has to accomplish getting the UFO over here to this place. Bethany Ann has to accomplish this, and you have the whole, beat of the book, which is she has to defeat XYZ. And for each, now my background is programming, so for me to actually go A, B, C, D is something I've done a lot in my life. And so I would just write these, and I'd say, okay, if she's going to have to do that, well, she has to get on the train, she has to go to the bank, something has to happen in the bank, and then she comes back home, and that's 4 beats. That's the whole quote scene, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, those 4 beats are probably going to be 3.5 chapters. But then I go to the next one. And so for a 75,000 word book, I would typically have anywhere from 55 to 75 little cells, spreadsheet cells. And then I would take these ones, and remember on the left-hand side was each arc,
Right.
not in order. But so now, because I do head hopping in those books, and it's another thing that a lot of fans are not terribly happy with, but they dealt. And so I would then take those beats and I would put them in chronological order, top, to bottom, and I'd put that into Scrivener, and I would just, each one of those, I'd break them into chapters, and then I'd just start writing it at the top. And I would write each scene as I went through. So you never find me going back and coming forward. My brain didn't operate that way. I'm fine going absolutely down. That's what I've been taught. And so I would go all the way through. And what that allowed me to do is I would end up having just in time, people checking my work. As I finished the first 5 chapters, I threw it to them. And there's a podcast on this in much more detail if you want to go find it somewhere. But so by the time I finished the book, usually I would finish on a Monday or Tuesday. Mm-hmm. They would have 5 to 10 chapters to finish reviewing, and we would have it out by Friday. Because I wasn't waiting 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. I wasn't waiting any of that time to get this book out. I'm impatient by personality. But what that has accomplished is, even now, as we, quote, matured into the full company we are, it is still 4 weeks from author turning the book to release. You get 4 weeks, and that's 1 week of pre-order, which means it's locked down. So we have 3 weeks. And that's assuming book 1. If book 1 doesn't need a beta review, it now is 3 weeks. So 1 week for the editors, 1 week for the JIT, 1 week of pre-order, and out. And it is phenomenal because our editing teams can do multiple millions of words a month. Our crew can. And our just-in-time go through all of the books. And so it's not just an editor, but the editor cleans it up. Every human being makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons if you have only a single editor, they'll often do 2 or 3 passes. Pass number 1, stick it in the thing so it's fresh again, look at number 2 weeks later. I'm not going to do that. Editor gets it 1 pass. Once they're done, it goes to like anywhere from 4 to 8 readers. Now I've noticed over time that what happens with readers is some people see the same mistake. They can see them. And so sometimes you'll see, let's say it's 8 people, then typically 4 people will get the chunk of them. 2 people will find, half of what they found and maybe a couple others. And 2 individuals in that 8 will find like 5 mistakes. But invariably, there'll be the 5 mistakes none of the others have ever found.
Wow.
And it's really an interesting insight into the mind of readers, of what they will find. The challenge is, we thought one time, well, great, let's go to 12 readers. Let's go to 14 readers. We'll catch them all. Well, no, what happens is you can't actually manage that many readers at one time. And so you pare it back down to anywhere from 4 to 8 is for us, mm-hmm. a sweet spot.
Wow, that's very cool on that. With you were talking earlier about having 10 authors and you have 11 ways of writing something. Mm-hmm. At Writers of the Future, when we have our workshop, and you probably experienced that also on your 20 Books to 50K, is quite often you'll have a couple judges, like the main judges teaching the workshop, it's either 2 or 3, they're constantly disagreeing with each other.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, which is really good for the writers because there's not like, this is how you write. Larry Niven does a whole different way than Tim Powers, which is totally different than Kevin Anderson, because Kevin will pump, first of all, he dictates everything, mm-hmm. and then he'll do, half a dozen books a year, whereas Tim Powers will do 1 book in a year. He does amazing, painstaking research into it. Mm-hmm. Larry Niven has a whole thing on science, and so you've got these different people that have, this is how I do mine. So you can actually pick and choose what works for you, and not like this is how you do it. Same thing with the illustrators too. Well,
so here's all right. So like anything, authors are human beings, and a lot of times authors like to be right. Mm-hmm. And my opinion is, no, you're not. And here's part of the reason why. If you'd like to take an answer, first, your answer is subjective. It's personality based. So let's go back and say, where is an objective way to measure the success of a book? Let me ask that. And the only way I've come up with at the moment is money. That's the only objective measure. The problem with going to money as the answer is the bifurcation of the readership is so big that there's no answer, period. Because one book, let's go with, this is going to be a horrible one for writers of the future, 50 Shades of Grey. Universally, that book is considered a poorly written book that made $50 million. So, which is it?
Yeah, we can also talk about Harry Potter too, because that's a favorite one that people like to talk about. It was poorly written, but yet.
Okay, so why? So what's the answer? Their answer is, if you're literati, right? And this is, now I'm going to get my soapbox, right? Because if you look at my first books, you're definitely going to say, on the questioning on it. But it engendered people to reread the series before the next book came out. So book 3, they read 1 and 2 to read book 3. At book 4, they'd gone back and read 1, 2, and 3 to read book. Why? You can't argue objectively that's not a well-written story. If they're rereading it, it has touched them emotionally. And I think at that point you have to agree. Now, if you want and then the blue paisleys on the wallpaper were done in such a way, but the little corner of the glue came off. That is a different experience. The readers who like that, and there are some, because I've had discussions with one.
With one.
One, it's all I could handle. It was a very long discussion. But I couldn't understand it because myself, I was bored to tears. And that's what you get in high school a lot of times. You know, look at the wonderful, it's not wonderful. It's a particular wonder for you, but for me as a reader, I hated it because I didn't need you to fill in the details back in the 1800s. We have TV. I know what a lion is. I don't need to understand the flowing hair that comes off of the mane and the wind as it, I don't need that.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's like Pulp Fiction also versus the pulps versus the slicks.
Well, yeah. So in the slicks and everything you're talking about there, people wanted to become slick because they got paid better, right? No one remembers the people who wrote the slicks.
That's right.
You only remember the pulps because those are the ones that stood the test of time.
Right. That's exactly right. And it's I think that's a really good point too that people need to understand. Like you can go into. I mean, I look at the stuff I had to read in high school. I really don't remember it, but I remember I saved my pennies and my nickels as a kid. And Texaco used to have this thing where they would, when you fill up or get so many gallons, you could then buy books. They'd have books. And so I remember reading, Jack London, and just.
All of the world.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And I love Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. Those were my favorite. And I still remember them, even though I read them so long ago. They were great stories. And, I don't remember the hair on the mane of the cat,
Wuthering Heights. I'm sorry, it's not there. Now, once again, I'm not the target market, and I guess that's where I was going to. The 3 authors you're speaking about earlier, they have different target markets. They should. If they don't understand the business, then they're not going to understand what I'm saying. Once you get into the business, you recognize that the different target markets are expecting different writing. So within their target market, they are absolutely correct.
Right.
But outside of their target market, they're absolutely wrong. And so one of the reasons I feel like I exploded the way that I did is I wrote to an untapped market. Not nearly 50 Shades of Grey untapped market, but it was enough to become a 7-figure author in a year. So it was something that, let me clarify that statement real quick. I did not make 7 figures my first year, but I was making 6 figures on the 12th month of my first year. So just
okay, yeah, let's not get too out of hand here. And now I'm up to 9 figures in my 8th year.
Yeah, no, oh man, dude, it's a goal. Everyone should have a goal.
Exactly.
Imagine how much good you can do with 9 figures. Universe.
Exactly. I gave you Bethany Ann. She's doing good, so let me do some good here.
A lot of people helping their fellow man. Someone named a baby after Bethany Ann. Come on.
Really? That's pretty cool.
Yes. There's a young girl named Bethany Ann.
Okay, good. So, now you've got, because we have both the writing contest and the illustrating contest. How do you pick your illustrators? Your cover artists? Or is it a closed?
It's not totally closed. The challenge is that we go through a lot of art. Each and every month we go through a lot of art. And as a production company, and we are effectively an IP creation engine. If you think of just LMBPN itself, we are relatively very unique company in the way that we do things. So I realized if you treat people well, they'll want to stay with you. And each time we worked with an artist who was easy to work with, go back to not being a jerk, and they produced art that we wanted and we were able to afford them, and, we worked well. I said, okay, can you stick around if I give you 6 books a month? Can you deal with that, and would that be okay? And you have to understand, artists are treated very poorly by indie authors, by and large. They will find, not all of them, I just merely to say that the bad experiences highly outweigh a lot of the good ones. Mm-hmm. And so when you work with a company like LMBPN, we're not that picky. I mean, we're picky within reason, but we're not like, and can you change this? And her middle index finger is the wrong way. And by the way, we want 4 of the characters, which arguably is not a good choice. I know I just broke it to test something, but in general, you really only want 1, maybe 2 characters, preferably 1 on the cover. And so I started, quote unquote, acquiring these artists who would be like, yes, I'll let you block up my time, because now they don't have to sell. They know that they're going to be paid. They're going to be paid very quickly, which is honestly one of the best things you can do. And they're going to be there for us. And so we've acquired 4, 5 different artists to help us with the amount of work we do each and every month. And they're not exclusive to us. So all of them will take on other clients. Just be aware that their availability might be June of next year. Mm-hmm. So just of what's going on. So, but we are testing, because occasionally we will get new needs, and we're like, oh, we need to recover this series, and we need 8 covers in the 2 months. And at that point, none of our existing people are going to be able to handle it. We have them scheduled out significantly farther than that, and we'll reach out to new ones.
Good. So that's something that I was just curious how that worked, because we have 12 winners each year, and they're all different types of art, and some of them are just amazing cover artists, and some of them are children's artists. Some of them have different goals, for what they're going to be able to do. I just did one interview with our winner from Turkey, and she's at USC now, and so for her is gaming. So she's working on, and she found she loves working with other artists to help bring out the best in them. So she's running projects now. She's a freshman in college, and she's running the senior.
Which USC?
University of Southern California here in Los Angeles.
Okay, no, that's my wife's alma mater. So she is like, we assume, oh, you must mean University of Southern California, and then Robin is like University of Southern Carolina or something. Oh. And we're like, what? There's another USC?
USC's already been used. Figure out something else.
No, but we love, and I'll just lay this out there for your people. We don't usually speak too much, but we do accept submissions. There is a little link at the very bottom of our page, and it's not really announced. Announcing it on something that's listened to 1 million times might be a bit much. And then from the art side as well, we do have internal people, a lady by the name of Kelly O'Donnell, who deals with the artists. Now, I will, upon occasion, undertake unique projects for an artist where I just like their work. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know what? I'm doing one right now with a guy by the name of Justin Smith. And I'm like, I did 1 book with him a year and a half ago. I liked his work. His pricing was way out of tune with what we would normally do. But we ended up selling that series on the strength of arguably just the cover and a paragraph. We sold the audio rights to it. And we're like, okay, we got to get this puppy going. And so from time to time, I'll go outside just to kind of see what's going on and because I like to, work with people.
Yeah, well, Edgar Rice Burroughs did pretty good with Frank Frazetta.
He did. Yes, he did. Trust me, I have a Frazetta. It's signed, but it's not numbered. I really appreciate Boris and Frazetta. Yes.
So now when we also spoke, you talked about authors are dopamine pushers. So let's. Can you talk about that and how that maybe is as a senior consideration on at least the type of fiction that you write?
Absolutely. I was in Barnes & Noble back when we used to go there and just hang out about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was in one of those chairs that you would be there, and I'm looking at everything. And I realized that, and this is all fiction, folks, just to clarify, yeah. I don't talk about nonfiction. And so I'm looking at that, and I realized that, what brings people to books is pleasure. There's some pleasure, just like if you go to a horror, and everyone understands that, visual is very dopamine pushing. It's a chemical in your brain that allows you to like stuff. And so I thought about that, and I realized that, the goal of someone to say that they liked your story is you're pushing their dopamine receptors. And that's one of the reasons, once again, we go back to the fact that, three artists can have three different ways of writing a book, and they're all actually accurate and inaccurate. In fact, the unfortunate late Dave Wolverton, he and I had a discussion, and I paid consulting with him in order to understand, because he was a medical, kind of like pre-med. And so to understand the chemicals in the human mind and how this went about. And so if you do something, and one of the best things to do, look on your shelf, virtual or not, find your favorite 3 different books. Look at them, reread them again, and mark every single scene that you love. There will be some scenes that you hate, or you'll just skip, I don't like this. Find out what appeals to you in those scenes. Why did you like this? What is the emotion behind it? That's all you're doing. You're not writing a treatise on these things. You will find the dopamine receptors for you as an individual. When that happens, write your stories to those dopamine receptors. Then you understand that you've created your target market. Any person that responds to your dopamine receptors is going to respond to your books. There you go. And if you want to do it one other way, that's kind of cool. Understand that the authors that you've chosen are now your target market for your books, for your advertising.
How's that work now?
So if you go, let's say, I'm just going to use Stephen King, because I'm not a horror person, but he's well known. If you're going through and you find all of these things that you like, and you find out that Stephen King pushes your buttons, pushes your dopamine receptors, and then because of that, you write books with these dopamine receptors in mind, not necessarily the way, mimicking Stephen King. It's the fact that you like this. You now know that Stephen King is a target market for you to go on Amazon and say, I want to put my books up against Stephen King, because it's ones you like, not because you're chasing whatever's popular that's going down right now. And so you're not chasing the tropes. You're actually finding out what causes you to be excited, writing books that make you happy, and then finding other authors that you can target to get those fans who are looking for more books, right? They can read faster than that particular author can put stuff out.
Sure.
And now you're able to at least narrow, and you are the target market in marketing parlance.
Wow. That's a very scientific way of analyzing and just knowing how to go after and get your and actually hit your target audience and know what your target audience is. There's a whole different look at that.
I spent a lot of time just wondering about this stuff the last 6 years.
So now I'm familiar with the Arthurian Gambit. Is that like your trademark series, or do you have, for someone who wants to, I can definitely push Bethany Ann. I can definitely, that's, my dopamine's like in full excretion right now. So talking about Bethany Ann.
Right. So the 3 or 4 major for Michael Anderle would be Arthurian Gambit, this main series. Arthurian Gambit, the universe, has 300 and something books in it, I think. It's a very significant sized universe with a lot of collaborators. Or Saren is a universe that I started with Martha Carr. That's got 200 and something books in it. I've got one called The Witch of the Federation, which is another female-led, and it's got a total of 23 books in that series, in those 2 series. But a fourth one for the male-led is Mr. Brownstone, which is completely taken over from Guns N' Roses' Mr. Brownstone. I'm like, what's a good name? I like Brownstone. But anyway, so, Mr. Brownstone, and that's a little bit more typical guy with a heart of gold that gets unwrapped, a little layer at each time. But otherwise, he's, keep it simple, stupid type of, I do my job, I don't get, and he gets embroiled and he finds out what he is, which is not normal. And that's kind of adjunct to Oracerian. It's within the Oracerian universe, but it's a little bit more down to earth and gritty, a little bit more gritty, I would say, than your typical urban fantasy and very male-led. So those are the main ones I would suggest.
Okay. So when you said that number of how many books are in there, those are all your books? You've written those, or do you actually have other people writing in your universe as well?
Yes. So back at the end of 2016, so 1 year into it, the fans were asking for a lot more books than I could even possibly write or wanted to write. It's like this needed to go into post-apocalyptic, and I didn't care to write post-apocalyptic. Right. I do recognize that if you write it and you write it wrong, you will get ripped apart, because they're expecting you to be accurate in your guns and in your ammo and in just everything. How to dig a ditch, how to,
Sure.
radioactive, all of that stuff. They're expecting, and I'm like, I'm not doing that research. So I knew Craig Martell at the time through 20 Books, and I reached out to him because I knew he was a post-doc guy. And I said, would you be interested in joining me over here and writing this? And then I had 2 or 3 others. I hired a ghostwriter, so to speak, gave her a pen name so that she could actually, build up a following. Because I asked her, I said, would you like to be paid or would you like to get a percentage of the book, which is what I'm doing with everyone else? She's like, I need to be paid. I'm like, all right. So I'm like, and then I would send her notes. See how much money you missed? You could have made this money if you just done this one. But later she decided to do it as a percentage.
She got wise.
But so I've done all sorts of things in that way. And so, yeah, Arthurian Gambit is mostly collaborative, and you'll see my name is second. You'll notice that a lot of times the major author is always big and bold, and the minor author is tiny at the bottom, and I don't like that. So I built it and said, if I'm not the one who's written at least 50% of this book, my name will be second, and it will never be that our names are any differently sized. They're always the same size. Mm-hmm. And so you always see that. If someone else, Candy Crumb, Michael Anderle. Candy's the one who wrote that stuff. She and I worked on it. We collaborated on concepts, but she worked through the LMBPN engine and beta fans and everything else. This has accomplished 2 things that I did not expect. The first one is, with her name first, she gets all of the credit predominantly for that series. Mm-hmm. The downside is, guess who gets the blame if the series, I didn't recognize this. I didn't know it would happen. It's just what has happened. And so, she gets the credit, but she gets the blame as well. And so where that's quote unquote helped is if she ignores, in this example, she did not, but I'm just saying, if the author ignores the suggestions of either myself or the beta readers and say, we think you should change this, and they're like, this is what the story needs, mm-hmm. and they go down in flames, they're the one who's going to go down in flames.
I get it. So now, when I was researching you, you also have another pen name that you write under.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. So,
are we talking about Michael Todd? Or another one?
Another one.
Okay, which one is this?
I was just looking for it, a female.
Judith Behrens?
Yes.
Okay, so Judith Behrens, so when you put out the quantity of books that LMBPN puts out, you think of it like an advanced course in publishing that is done in the matter of a few years, what takes others 20 years. If a typical author writes, let's say 4 books a year, that's not traditional. Traditional is 1 time a year, maybe 2, unless you're James Patterson, and that's based on traditional business-to-business sales. We could go into that in another series. Mm-hmm. But let's say you put out 4. Well, I had put out, 8 to 10 in my first year. So I was already at 3 years worth of knowledge. With the publishing company doing what we did, where we scaled up, I'm doing 1.5 years to 3 years of a typical really strong sci-fi publisher in 1 year, which means that for the smaller guys, I do 10 years of knowledge in a year. Mm-hmm. So after 6 years, we've got quite a bit. We've tried a lot of things. One of the things that we were concerned with Martha and myself is, would one author make more sense than 2? Because the theory was fans don't like collaborative books. They prefer single author books. So we put up there and built Judith Behrens over, and you'll see Michael Anderle and Martha Carr is attached to it, but it's not on the cover. And so that was a test of what's going on. Now, some of the other things that people don't realize is when you do things with Amazon and you can potentially get bonuses, which we do invariably every month, someone gets it in the company, they base it on the authors. So Martha Carr is an author, Michael Anderle is an author, Martha Carr, Michael Anderle is an author, that's 3. Judith Behrens with Martha Carr and Michael Anderle is 4. They don't do anything. That's how they split it up. And so over time, we realized we were shooting ourselves in the foot, not leaving it under Judith, under Martha and Mike. So we moved it back. But that was the test that we were doing is, does a single author sell better than just 2 names?
Right. No, that's also a similar problem to what Owen Hubbard had too. He wrote with 15 different pen names, and quite often in the pulps, he'd have 2 and I've got We got some of them here where three of his stories were in the same pulp issue. He was writing 100,000 words a month, and so he just ran out of magazines to write for. So he had to use different pen names in order to be able to be able to sell everything that he was able to write, to put out there.
See, that's an interesting aspect that I'm trying to be cognizant of your time here, but that's an interesting point that people don't realize, that the true pulp writers of the yesteryear, that all of the fast people today that are like, you can put out a book a month, they knew that 80 years ago. It's not that they couldn't. And get this, they did it on, if anything, old typewriters that would connect and stop.
Yeah.
They didn't do it on these nice word processors that change things for you. It's a quote unquote lost art. It's like, we're not doing anything new. We just have better tools. The masters had them already done.
It's funny, when we came out a decade ago with the Storyspin Golden Age, there was 153 short stories that they had published. When we were proofreading it, we'd go through, and all of a sudden it would just stop, and then you'd see it start again a page earlier. He would go back. If he found something that was a mistake, he'd go back, because you didn't have the whiteout back then. He'd go back and start a page earlier and type through the mistake. And so you have to catch that on the proofreading. Then, okay, here's where he stopped and here's where he picked up again. So he typed through the mistake, whatever it was.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, A. Van Vogt commented when he saw him writing once, he would just have the paper in his typewriter, and he'd look towards the wall, and he'd just start typing. And he had a composition speed of 94 words a minute, and he could type between 120 and 150 words a minute. So he would just pump it out. And so Van Vogt talked about what it was like watching him create. He was just like, the story would roll before him. He'd be typing what the story was as he was creating it there. But anyway, this has been amazing. We've already hit our hour here. I knew this would happen, so we'll save the other questions for some point later on down the road.
So all million of you listeners, push John and go, can you please get Mike back on? Because I want to hear John get back to me and go, hey.
No worries. This has been a lot of fun. And it's very much along the lines of what we do with Writers of the Future. And this becomes then a next step for an aspiring writer too, of what they can do and what they have to look forward to. And the fact that you started and became a writer, because that's one thing that's really cool too, is some people I knew I was going to be a writer when I was 3 years old. We didn't talk about that, but you didn't. You had a whole different trajectory that then switched over just from being a super fan to a super writer.
Yeah, I got shut down in high school. But the short answer is I submitted something to the catalog or whatever, the magazine, and it got horrible reviews, and I just shut down for the next 30 years because of it.
Yeah, so that's something that you don't get with Writers of the Future. The worst you're going to get is a letter saying, thank you very much, please resubmit. Nobody's going to rain on your parade. But anyway, this has been amazingly fun, Michael. I've really enjoyed this, and the fact that you've got hundreds of books, I don't know. This is creating a real problem for me right now. Just because I have so many books I need to read to keep up with the guests. But I'm totally addicted to the Arthurian Gambit. So I thank you for that.
Good, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yes, and thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Also, the books Writers of the Future are available in bookstores, online, and wherever you get your books. Again, thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you very much, Don.